Okay, ladies and gents, welcome to the Vicinity and Beyond podcast with me, Henry Ginman.
And me, Julie Grail.
And today we are looking at a topic which we have covered somewhat tangentially in the past, and that is the visitor levy. And we're asking the question, is it big money, big opportunity, or is it bad timing? So, Julie, last time, what was the context which we covered this last time?
We talked about it in the context of growth as a bid concept and accommodation bids, and that being potentially a precursor to how tourist tax might come in. And the fact that for us in England, we've been saying for quite some time, it's not here, government are saying they're not going to do it, but the likelihood is they would, because Scotland have already put in place provisions, and Wales have already put legislation in place. So it felt like only a matter of time, and that time has come.
And that is what brings it to today's topic. That time has come. There is a consultation out, and we will come back to that to understand what that is and what the implications are. But just to give a bit of background then, so a visitor levy is a levy on those people that come to the country, or not necessarily those that come to people that stay in hotel accommodation, short-term accommodation overnight, sometimes called a transient visitor levy, and is usually a fee, either a flat fee or a percentage fee, typically quite a small one relative to the stay of £1, €1. I think we look at Berlin charging around 5% of the room rate, Bruges flat €2 a person, Paris between €1 and €3 per person per night for people that are staying in that accommodation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I did quite a lot of work on this a couple of years ago on behalf of the Westminster bids, actually, to look at profiling what happens elsewhere, how that impacts into the English model and overlays on the English tax system, and what were the likely kind of ramifications for bids. And back then, some of the data, it's really interesting to dig beneath the data and say, everyone starts, and I'm hearing it a huge amount at the moment, everyone starts with, it's just £2 a night, and it's paid, the cost is borne by tourists, so what's the big problem? That just isn't the facts at all. And where taxes are charged across worldwide, I did a load of research globally. In every single case, the base taxes are much lower than in England. So that's the starting point. From a VAT perspective, hotels are on 20% standard VAT rate in England, the same as everything else. And in every other European country, they are on a reduction. So starting point is we're on a different tax level anyway.
Yep.
So globally, England's taxes are already higher than anywhere else before we add this extra layer in.
So we're getting into the arguments of pro and against it. Just before we do, to understand why it's come up again, the volume of tax levy, and it's useful putting this into perspective against the business rates that episodes that we just recorded. So we looked at business rates and we said, okay, business rates is putting 13 billion into local authority coffers, raising roughly 26 billion for government. It's estimated by the Institute of Fiscal Studies that a £1 per night charge across England could raise around 420 million per year, and a large share of that would come from London. So just trying to put this into perspective, we've got business rates at 13 billion into local authorities, 26 billion nationally. A potential £1 per night charge across England, 420 million, compared to what bids are investing into a towns and cities. That's about 150 million across the country. So it's a significant number that we're talking about, which I guess is why it's being put forward as, in this time of we don't have enough funds to do things, here's another way of raising money, is it?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a if you just do a crude estimate, which that one was, of £1 a night on hotel beds, you can make that much money. But that presupposes there's sufficient viability within a region to even warrant doing that collection, because there's an admin cost and burden of that collection. So in some of the regions, there just won't be enough hotels within a close enough region for the viability to stack up. So that isn't a total take across the country, because it isn't achievable everywhere. The numbers in London vary wildly from over the last few months, from quotes of it being able to raise 90 million to being able to raise 240 million based on a £2 a night. Who knows which is the right one at the moment? But that's an enormous variation. I mean, both are quite large numbers, but it's an enormous variation. It doesn't build in any admin cost. So stepping back a bit further...
It also assumes, presumably, that the numbers stay the same.
Yes, that's right.
Change.
And we don't kill off any hotels in the process. Yes, exactly. But stepping back a step even further, why are we in this place? Well, we're in this place, obviously, because government needs more money. And it looks like quite an easy take to policymakers. And it's part of a wider sort of suite of lobbying mechanisms that have been in place for a number of years about, from a fiscal policy point of view, to devolve local taxation for local spend. Why do local authorities potentially like this? It's because it would be their money. Rather than redistribution from central funds back, they would collect locally and it would be theirs to then direct accordingly without those additional formulas. And when they've got black holes in their spending, which they do, this looks like quite easy money from people that aren't theirs. But of course, that's not, again, quite how it is.
Because what Scotland and Wales have done is they've passed the legislation to say that their local authorities can then have the authority to do it should they choose.
Yeah. And so far, Edinburgh, Glasgow and Aberdeen have all decided they will.
They're going to go
Edinburgh starts first in July on a 5%, and Glasgow follows, and then Aberdeen have plumped for a 7%. There are, incidentally, though, a number of other local authorities across Scotland who have looked at this and either paused it or indeed rejected after a consultation because they don't have that viability.
Well, and because your point about the collection, presumably the majority of the burden of collection falls on the hotels, not on...
It does, and this is a really interesting, we're going to get into just the weeds slightly on that point, but it's a really interesting scenario that the consultation that's now out, and it's called a Visitor Levy consultation for England now. It has been called overnight levy for quite a long time, so these terms are still kind of interchangeable, but within the consultation, there is a series of questions being asked, and it offers up the question and therefore prospect of the collecting authority, the local authority, being able to have an admin fee, but it doesn't offer the opportunity for a hotel to have an admin fee for doing it. And from a hotel's perspective, they are taking all of the burden, all of the liability, with no fees attached to it. So understandably, hotels are saying, no way, come on, that's not acceptable. You're creating a taxation model that puts us in the firing line from a liability point of view, from a tax point of view, from a burden point of view, from a customer-facing point of view, and you're not even going to allow us an admin fee for doing so.
So why don't we make the case for the hotel then? If you're a hotel and I'm saying, it's just a £2, I've probably been guilty of this in the past. Actually, on one level, you've got the argument that it's just £2 a night, but on the other hand, it's raising so much money. Well, how can it be raising so much money and only be £2 a night? You know, they're sort of slightly conflicting one another, aren't they?
Yeah.
But so if you're a hotel, you almost, because it's so small, each individual payment, that probably adds a bit of a burden. And then how does that work with your pricing mechanisms and with VAT and
there's so many complexities on this. And the great thing about working in bids is you end up getting down in the weeds of things that you never thought you'd need to know about. And I still couldn't profess to be an expert in this at all, but I have got into the detail of this to quite an extent over recent weeks. And so from a hotel point of view, financially, they're struggling in most cases, certainly in central London. That's where I've got a lot of data at the moment. They're struggling. They're struggling with numbers, with sales. They're just about at pre-pandemic levels, but only at basic room rate. I've got high value sort of premium hotels reporting that they may be able to sell their room rate at an acceptable figure and to a reasonable occupancy level. That's about where it stops. Where they used to make a lot of profit out of F&B, many of these sort of premium customers are coming in with a McDonald's bag and not actually eating in the restaurant. So already the profits are down from that perspective, even if the numbers are in the beds. And then their costs are astronomical. And either things we've talked about through business rates, but, the increased NI, minimum wage implications, business rates that are already high but coming even higher, refinancing costs that have been very high already, and that gearing that's a challenge. So they're already in a difficult space. And what's really interesting is, and I don't know how much this is, it'd be interesting to hear feedback actually, I don't know how much this happens elsewhere, but in London, over the last few years, there's been a kind of discretionary accommodation service charge been built in across the West End, whereby discretionary usually 5% at point of bill at the desk, which is equivalent to or modernising the cash tips. So then the staff weren't getting cash tips anymore. So this is a way to get cash directly into what's known as tronc. So the staff goes straight to staff. At the tip, the old-fashioned tips jar has been modernised into a 5% discretionary levy. And that's what bolsters the low-wage staff of the hotel sector to ensure they earn enough. Because on minimum wage, even on London living wage, they're not really earning enough, and that tops them up. So one of the biggest concerns at a direct level is if hotels have this £2 a night on at the point of sale there, and the customer is then being asked to pay the 5% discretionary levy, they're not going to pay the discretionary one. They're just going to switch it. So staff directly lose out. That's quite significant, and that's not getting seen at all.
Probably quite a politically motivating, charged message that will get some people talking.
And then the other interesting thing that we're evidencing now through the data is I've got hotels breaking down for me the actual cost for them of the admin burden of collecting it. Because it's fine, it's just £2 a night and it's borne by the customer.
Yeah.
And how hard can it be? Well, it can be hard, it transpires. So just some kind of light touch breakdown. Credit card fees to start with, which it's easier, incidentally, I just park that for a moment and say what we're hearing, certainly from the more premier end of the market, is they'd much rather have a fixed fee than a percentage, because percentage is so much more complex. Obviously that becomes the aggressive tax in the budget hotel.
If you're a budget hotel, a £2 a night is much more significant than your £150.
Yeah. But nevertheless, the complexity is already great. So having a flat fee is certainly what's being recommended. Online travel agent commission has a charge. Front desk administration of the handling of this has a cost, a real cost, and time and dealing with, in particularly, and there's been quite a debate on this in Edinburgh. It'd be interesting to see how this pans out. Within the Scottish regime and in the consultation for England, there's proposition of having a variety of exemptions. And there's huge question marks about who administers those exemptions. And that's asking for sensitive personal information at a hotel desk. Who wants to do that? Hotels are saying, hold on a minute, we don't want to get involved in that kind of stuff. If you want to have some exemptions, you do that as a claim back afterwards that gets dealt with by your local authority. Don't expect us to be asking personal information at a desk. So, and if you have to, there's some sensitivity, some training required with staff, and some difficulties of handling, particularly if you're saying you're not exempt, and having that kind of stalling at a desk. The necessary systems changes, which as a tech guy you'll understand that. I don't understand it other than I know it's necessary to try and impact on the cost and collection, but also then the management of those funds and the treatment of those funds from a tax point of view and a reporting point of view. And the obligation, because it's being propositioned as a self-assessment levy, so the hotel would be required to then report on number of stays, therefore number of pounds they achieved, and then report that and feed that into their collecting authorities. The onus would be on the hotel to do that, not the other way around.
You're outsourcing tax collection of VAT to
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's some real work to do on building systems to be able to do that reconciliation, and then compliance and kind of audit side of things to ensure that, from a professional point of view, they have geared themselves up properly to protect themselves.
You don't want to get a fine because you've not calculated it correctly. And
there's provisions in the consultation to put civil powers in to fine the hotel if they get it wrong. So exactly that. And what that does on the estimate that I've had some of the London hotels
there's a killer figure coming, isn't there?
There is. It gets to, if, and not that I'm advocating a £5 a night levy, but we did it on the basis of a £5 a night levy. There's a presumption that it could cost as much as £3.50 to do that per
night.
Per night. So that's
make it an equivalent cost.
70% of the £5 could be cost on the hotel to just make that happen, but they've got to pass over the entire £5.
And presumably not many of those line items would decrease if it was £2 a night.
No.
So
no, exactly. It wouldn't even cover its...
You could be costing the hotel more in the admin burden of collecting it than you're getting in tax take.
Absolutely.
So if we're looking at the whole pie and growing the economy and increasing productivity, this would be a negative score.
Exactly. This is just a backways route of making it look like it's an easy tax to collect because somebody new's paying it. And of course, really the hotel's paying it.
I suppose the big assumption there is that the hotels can't increase their prices by a commensurate amount, and that by doing so, it wouldn't have an adverse effect on numbers staying. Because if you could do those things, then you would say everyone puts the prices up, everyone collects more, visitors numbers don't go down, then everyone's a winner.
Yeah. And it's an interesting, there's an interesting comparison actually between, and this is a bit anecdotal rather than fact-based at the moment, so forgive me, but I think it serves the purpose. When you consider the scope and implications across central London, for example, versus a regional city. So what Manchester and Liverpool have been doing on their accommodation bid is advocating that they're basically collecting this money for a subvention fund to buy event operators to come to their city. So they're buying operators out of an existing contract elsewhere and saying, come to Manchester and we'll make it work for you. So it's a direct subsidy to an operator.
They get the Brit Awards or something, and then loads of people come and stay and watch it.
Yeah. And in a regional city where it's in a very controlled environment, that is achievable. Mm-hmm. That isn't going to happen in central London. That just the complexity of the marketplace, that isn't how it's going to work. There may be some scope for some of those funds to grow, for example, a major international marketing campaign.
We've really got to sell Britain, haven't we?
That's it.
The only way. Yeah. Everything's got to increase for everyone. Yeah. Got to keep. Yeah. If we're going to put prices up effectively. Yeah. People have got to want to come to Britain more over. Yeah. Where else they work.
Yeah. And from a sort of crude subvention fund point of view, there may be scope for some of that fund to do significant new event establishment in London. But where will it help? Will it be overnight stays? Will it be daytime visitors? Will it be domestic market? Will it be international market? There isn't the direct link anywhere near the same way as there is in a regional city. So there's nervousness about that. And there's a whole load of stacking of other supply and demand concerns that particularly West End hotels have, that they're not, however much anyone believes that, they're gold standard hotels, financially, they're not in a strong place at the moment. And international market is struggling. It's incredible, actually. We've got hotels across that core West End patch are reporting to us 50% of their current customers are domestic market, which is very, very high proportion right in the heart of the West End. And that's because the international market isn't coming It's not because the domestic market's gone, because the international market isn't coming. Certainly since January last year, the US tourism numbers have reduced, and that's having an impact on London. We know particularly across the European market, there's been a lot of work separately done on this. The loss of tax-free shopping post-Brexit has had a marked impact on the retail spend across Europe. And the example you may have heard me say before is that, because it's an easy one to explain, if you want to buy, not that I ever could or would, if you want to buy a £50,000 Rolex, you're not going to buy it in London because it costs 10,000 more in London than Paris or Milan. And that's having a big trickle-down effect onto the international tourism company.
Maybe you get a status boost from, I also bought this in London because it cost me 10,000 more. People are playing different games.
Yeah, I can't quite imagine that, but I guess some people might do that. So there's some real concerns about the implementation of this, and we could be flippantly saying, "Oh God," I've talked to friends about this who have just said, "That's just £2, you'd pay it, wouldn't you?" Some people.
Well, you could understand that from the outside looking in, and people are used to paying it. People who've gone to these cities in Europe, they've paid £2 a night, they've forgotten about it by the time they got home.
Yeah.
And so it's easy, I think, from their perspective, to understand that.
Yeah. But what's interesting that we're seeing, and from the direct data being provided to us from these West End hotels, so two really valid points. One is, one of the operators that has central reservations and therefore can look at supply and demand and pricing across the whole of Europe is telling us no longer is his central London hotel price competitive with the rest of Europe, or indeed in high demand. He's losing out to Barcelona, various other European cities who price-wise are coming in so much cheaper relatively. And that does influence demand. It absolutely does. So he's showing us that already that's happening, and that's before we've got a tax on top.
Yeah.
And then secondly...
And to your person who goes, oh, it's just £2. I mean, you can also understand that from the perspective from when was the last time you chose a holiday and you looked at, oh, shall we go to Greece or Spain, or going on a stag to, Czech Republic's really good, but it's really expensive now, so we're going to go to Riga.
Yeah.
And that's the stacking problem, isn't it?
That's it.
And you've got higher VAT.
Yeah.
You've got what are the duties as you come through the airport as well?
Passenger duty, whatever it's called. But yes, and again, UK is more expensive than any other.
Again.
So on each metric, we are globally the most expensive, and certainly Europe the most expensive. And it does start having an impact. And it's interesting you say that. So that picks up the next point I was going to make around business travel. Leisure travel, there might be perhaps less price sensitivity, because if you want to come to London, you might just come to London, even though you know it's more expensive, because actually, you've got this
really want to see
coming to London, right?
Yeah.
Corporate travel, particularly around conferencing and general business travel, you make much more financially based decisions, particularly if it's on an irregular basis, particularly if you've got a big annual corporate conference you do and you price all of that up and you take into account travel and you take into account, airfares and taxes and everything else.
Yeah.
You end up making very different corporate decisions. And I was speaking to somebody the other day who talked through with me, it's incredible to believe actually, but an annual corporate conference was being built for big business that had always been in London up until now, or at least in the UK, and in recent years had been London. They ended up going to Miami to bring people predominantly from the UK, but elsewhere in Europe, because it was cheaper on all metrics to fly everybody to Miami and do a conference there than it was to do it in London. And the majority of the workforce were in the UK. Train fares are so expensive around the UK, you can fly across Europe easily for cheaper than getting up the country. So we do really have that price sensitivity kicking in.
And I haven't done their maths on this, but if you're expecting it to potentially raise 420 million and you've got 40.9 million overseas visitors spending roughly 28 billion, from inbound tourism, how many of those people do you have to put off or make a different decision before you've lost?
To get a net loss, yeah.
Before you've made a net loss position, because like I say, it's just £2. We keep saying it, but we're recording this on the back of doing the business rates podcast, where we were talking about hotels having 115% increase in their rateable value.
Absolutely right.
So there's another thing that hotels are going to have to pay.
Yeah.
So,
and we also, in the business rates conversation, we talked about part of the risk register focus for bids to recognise that business survival is a significant question at the moment. So it's all very well saying the 400 odd million, whatever's expected, but if you've lost a number of hotels in the process because they just are no longer viable, you haven't even got that much take down the line because you've pushed them out of business.
Yeah.
And there is a real concern about geographical kind of fencing of this levy. If, for example, for the London scene, if you don't put it across the whole of London, you've got a real danger of just pushing out customers beyond central zone because it's cheaper, and then doing two things: A, reducing demand into the central London hotels and impacting them, but also increasing the burden on transport without additional investment in it, because you're creating tourist commuters basically who aren't actually staying in centre anymore and staying on the outskirts.
And with our current tax position, because one of the arguments would be, where is this going to be spent? Because very often in those European examples, it's being reinvested back into that tourism-based economy, whereas with our finances, I don't know, how is it proposed? How are they going to spend this extra money they're hoping that
I mean, the proposition is it's to be recycled back into the visitor economy broadly.
That's the plan.
But nobody believes that will happen.
Okay.
And already the figures being quoted in Edinburgh are very nervous that a large proportion is probably elsewhere and not really into what we would consider base management and visitor economy. One of the things we're advocating on behalf of bids and businesses is that within the consultation is that there are absolutely necessary, transparent and accountable consultation periods for each mayor to, author this design in each place and to be sure that it's workable and take into account views, but then going forwards, having some strong governance safeguards in place to have these real businesses and bids and others as stakeholders at the table with them to ensure that it does get spent in the right places, and that when that spend is done, not just that it's good quality targeted spend, but it also doesn't overlap or duplicate existing measures. And bids are such strong delivery partners in this. And incidentally, and I would say it because I'm a bid advocate, but it's very remiss of government, bids have not been quoted in that consultation. It's a 36 question based consultation. It's about 10 chapters. It's endless pages. There's a list of relevant stakeholders that should be in the mix. Bids are not referenced, and they jolly well should have been. We're the ones that know how levies work. We're the ones that have been running it for 20 years. And we're the ones on the ground in partnership at times, collaborating with or in alongside local authorities, delivering services on the ground. It's really remiss we're not named and we're not taken seriously.
So what is in the consultation? It's not a consultation of, should we do this or not? This is a consultation of, this is coming.
When we do it,
how should we do it?
Yeah.
What will it look like?
Yeah, and there's a load of stuff, which is probably for another day to get into the detail, but yeah, what should it look like? Who should be charged? How should they be charged? For how long should they be charged? I.e., is there a, for Edinburgh, for example, it's 6 consecutive nights maximum. And then on the sort of flip side of it, what does the admin look like? Who will do that kind of collection and reporting? There's a proposition in the English model: should it be at local authority level or should it be centralised even up as far as HMRC? And there's still a lot of working through of that detail. And at the moment, we're saying whatever happens and wherever it lands, everything, as much as possible, must be standardised across the country within enshrined in legislation, because we've got so many hotels that have are in multiple jurisdictions. They can't be, already the burden could be enormous. They can't be then having to do a different system per jurisdiction, particularly think about London, there's 30
Yeah.
boroughs. If they're even in 4 of them and they've got a different reporting system, a different collection regime in each one, each team within a wider central office has got to learn 4 different regimes.
Oh, just when we were looking at the accommodation bit stuff and looking at hotels, T's and C's, for example, or if you're Premier Inn, you've got one set of T's and C's for your hotels across the country, rather than each hotel having different ones. You've got to have those kind of uniform structures, otherwise it becomes too operationally costly.
Yeah. And there's a load of extras that we need to delve into more gradually, and certainly post-consultation, when we've put that first response in, we need to understand in a bit more detail, but particularly, what does the charge go on? We're advocating it's just on the bed, cost of the bed, not on extras, not on food and beverage. How do you then apply it if you've got an adult rate and a children rate? How do you apply it if you've got a package 3 for 2? How do you apply it if you're running dynamic pricing and it's paid for via a booking platform well ahead of the stay, and then it gets cancelled? And it's been paid, but you then got a refund process. Is there there absolutely has to be an admin fee associated with that refund process, because again, the hotel's done something and hasn't even brought any money in, but we'll have to pay some out. So there are loads and loads of layers of, when you think about this, £2 a night paid by the customer. It's not that simple.
What's interesting about this is that they were talking about a kind of a devolution of power to probably mayoral authorities, local authorities, but it's the ones who've been vocal about this, the Manchester, Liverpool, if he doesn't run to be leader of the Labour Party, they're the ones where they've got the accommodation bids.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have presumably a fight in those cities to say, well, we want to implement this levy versus, well, hold on, how are you going to spend it? We're already doing it. We've already got a kind of levy on these hotels that we're spending, that they've voted for and potentially voting again for. But it's interesting to see it's coming from the same. I guess it's where the hotels are, so it's probably not surprising. So like you say, there are only a certain number of places
viable locations. Yeah. And I think also, I mean, so many people have asked us this individually and separately. I think there's been some belief by some locations that if they get themselves an accommodation bid, they've insulated themselves away from a visitor levy. I just don't think it'll work like that. I think that's a dangerous presumption, and that's certainly in the conversations I've had with certain regions, that's not stopping a mayor think about doing it themselves. If they've got a route to do it, to funds into their own coffers rather than just locally, they're going to do it.
I can understand how it could strengthen the argument, but it's, as you say, it's those places that are arguing for a visitor levy that is also having accommodation bids, or just the two examples. But the idea that if you could get a group of people saying, well, we're already doing this, and it'd be interesting what the hotels think. So if hotels feel like they could implement an accommodation bid and feel like they've got more control over where that goes through board positions, etc., that they make that case. Whether, I don't know who would adjudicate that case if you've got Andy Werner on one side and then Manchester accommodation bid on the other. But
arguably, if you imagine just picking up the London example of how do you put governance structure in place, a slightly different reason, but the Oxford Street Development Corporation has now kicked off. It started at the beginning of January. That's a whole sort of infrastructure associated with that, including a board that has brought a variety of industry specialisms together and representation onto effectively a governing board of that public spend and delivery. And indeed the bid, New SN Company, is on that board. So there is a precedent within a mayoral environment to have a governance structure. Now, arguably you could then facetiously say, well, yeah, just because it's there doesn't mean it has influence. But that's part of the infrastructure, isn't it? How you build it. And I think that's really critical for the necessary insight that bids, particularly across London because of their scale. You know, these bids are collecting significant sums of money annually and doing significant services. It would be really wrong to have those things separated and to not have their bid insight onto that governance structure, and indeed not to have that sort of protection of the hotel's voice of giving that insight all the time, but also ensuring you're demonstrating quality delivery, well-targeted delivery, and seeing impact, being able to measure impact, and desperately trying to avoid any overlap. And BIDs are great delivery partners because they do this stuff all the time. They are delivering these projects on the ground. And I think it's achievable. It's whether there's the will to do that.
And so who is the consultations 18th of February? By the time this comes out, you may well have passed that date. So who is, who is being consulted, and how is it being?
It's one of these government consultations open to all, but in practice, who responds? Local authorities will respond, mayoral authorities will respond. Other combined authorities who are currently not in the mix but might be, will be lobbying, because some areas who are not mayoral may want to do this, and there are questions in the consultation of whether they want to and what it would look like. And hoteliers themselves, tourism associations, UK Hospitality has been very strong, and then obviously BIDs and other business representative bodies are responding. And what we've done with the hotels is said, we'll compile all this for you, but you also have to ensure your voice is heard individually too. It's always really dangerous to do joint responses and then not have your volume of response, because then the policymakers, we only heard that from 5. Yes, but it was 5 on behalf of 500. So we have to make sure volume.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe that, as you say, is some detail we can get into and revisit as the consultation progresses. But for your sort of closing summary thoughts, opinion, the question we originally posed at the beginning was big money, big opportunity, or bad timing?
I think it's really unfortunate timing, but it's probably coming anyway. And therefore, we must ensure that if money is available, it gets targeted and spent well, because we definitely need money. And we're all in agreement that we need better investment in our cities. We're all in agreement that local authorities need more funds. The local authorities across London particularly are advocating that they have a proportion of that fund directly hypothecated into them, so they spend. Now, that's good, potentially, but also dangerous, because that might just go directly into non-tourism activity and fill a black hole. But it's coming, so ignore it at your peril, understand it, and influence its design, so that actually, when it comes, we have some influence and controls and some safeguards.
My 2 cents on that would be probably one of the most important things would be we've got to sell Britain.
Yeah.
And if those numbers fall, this is a disaster. If those numbers increase and hotel stays increase as a result of doing this, then it should or could, I imagine, be much more palatable and even turn people into proponents of it. But I suppose the examples you were saying earlier, getting events to those cities in order to, what's the phrase, fill heads on beds.
Yeah.
We've got to do that as a country if we do a visitor levy as a country.
Yeah.
And how are we selling Britain at home and abroad?
Yeah. And if you pile that visitor levy at the moment on top of the highest VAT across Europe, the highest passenger duties across Europe, and now absolutely unprecedented business rate costs on the hotel sector, quite bad timing.
Something tells me 2026 is going to be the tax-themed year, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Julie.
Thank you.